sometimes they're fair. So I don't want people thinking, oh, there's nothing redeemable in Israel. Oh, Israel's all boogeyman. No, absolutely not. There are interesting parts of the Israeli democracy, and the media did a terrific job there. But Biden didn't get the from the Palestinians. He got it from the Israelis.
I don't even think Biden probably got it from Twitter, and I don't even think Biden said 40 beheaded babies. I think he said he saw pictures of beheaded babies. But again, there's zero evidence that propaganda claim. There's zero evidence that propaganda claim originated from Israel. There's no evidence of that from Israeli media. There is, however, evidence that the original hospital bombing claim, the really big one that drove media for arguably for weeks, that Israel had bombed a hospital and destroyed it and 500 plus people had died, that came straight from Hamas. And that was uncritically amplified by almost every mainstream and alternative media outlet across the world. And that was incredibly damning and incredibly damaging on the Israeli side. And it took a long time for people to take a critical look. And there are still people to this day that believes that it's like a 50-50 chance that Israel bombed that hospital, even though one, a hospital is not bombed, and two, there's absolutely zero evidence for that claim. So we want to talk about whose propaganda is doing better on which side. Every single day I'm hearing about another Palestinian killed. I'm hearing about these 3 hostages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, and then there was that whole, the J-Dam and the hospital bombing thing. That was a huge thing. To argue that like Israel is winning the propaganda war, I don't know if I believe that. When you say that Hamas was killing soldiers as well, I think it was like 100 soldiers to 1,100 civilians. So if we're going by ratios, Hamas technically did a worse job than Israel. Again, I don't know if I would go by ratios, but it's like
373 soldiers.
Was it 373 soldiers were killed? I thought it was like 120. Okay, there might have been a different number on that. Okay, so maybe it might be 300 soldiers to 900 civilians. Okay, but when Hamas sets out to kill people, I don't think they're doing any due diligence trying to figure out who's a civilian or who's a soldier. When I say collateral damage, it sounds like I'm on a different planet. So we can make these emotional appeals over and over again, and we can use like the number over and over again. But here are facts. Okay, we know that Hamas operates out of civilian areas. Even Amnesty International limited as much since 2014. We know that there are videos of medical people running and grabbing guns and giving it to Hamas fighters. We can watch those videos on YouTube. We know that Hamas has tunnels that it's built that operate underneath civilian infrastructure. We know that Hamas uses hospitals to bring captured hostages to. We know that Hamas used Al-Shifa as an interrogation site. Again, even Amnesty International and the UN said as much. We know that Hamas has fired rockets out of refugee areas and out of other medical operating areas. We know these things are true, okay? We know that. And we also know that Israel has been pressured to allow more humanitarian aid in, and they acquiesced to that pressure. We know that Israel gave the northern Gazans warning on when they were supposed to leave, told all of them to evacuate the area before the bombings began. We know that Israel makes phone calls to certain buildings or houses to tell people that you need to leave. And we know that Israel does roof knocks before they bomb these things, okay? We know every single thing that I just said, and we can fight over any of these you want. These are all undisputed facts that are verified by third-party international orgs, some of which are quite hostile towards Israel. To go through all of that evidence and then to say, well, 18,000 civilians, so they must be indiscriminately targeting. That is a statement uttered without evidence, and it begs for any sort of justification whatsoever. There is none. There's no evidence that any of this exists. It is a fantastic point that's thought up in the West by people that are dealing with no actual facts on the ground of anything that's happening.
Thank you. There's a lot to respond to. Yeah.
No, those 19,000 civilians are not dead.
Is that what I said?
I mean, you said that there was no evidence that the 18,000 people had died. I don't know.
I said there's no evidence that they were being indiscriminately targeted or intentionally killed by Israel.
It was all an accident.
Do you think they were intentionally trying to kill civilians?
Definitely.
Then why didn't they kill more? Why only 19,000?
Because they're doing it in a way where they have plausible deniability. Look, I'm sorry, I'm going to do my first insult, but for schmucks like you to go, well, they were moving them and they were being super gentle and they surrounded them with pillows and they warned them, and they killed 20 times as many civilians as Hamas did. But golly, it was all an accident.
Gotcha. And I'll let you do your whole thing. I'm just curious. Do you have a single shred of evidence for any of that? That's what I thought. Okay, you can do your whole thing, but you have no evidence. You have no evidence for the indiscriminate targeting of civilians.
People are dead.
Are you just going to keep repeating the number? We can count if you want. We can spend the rest of the room counting up to 90,000.
Not civilians?
I'm saying they're not indiscriminately targeting civilians. And if you have a single shred of them indiscriminately targeting civilians, I'd like to hear it.
Targeting civilians,
yes.
Yeah. So my contention is, since they're dropping 2,000-pound bombs, dumb bombs, 29,000 bombs, etc., and they've killed 19,000 people, which are almost all civilians, but even if you take the IDF numbers, over 3/4 are civilians. My contention is that's not an accident.
Can you respond to what Destiny said? He gave out a list of things saying that because Israel do all of these, therefore they're really trying to take security very seriously.
Yeah, I'm going to address that. But wait, so my contention is they didn't accidentally kill a disproportionate number of civilians. Now, so you're saying your contention is they were trying their damnedest to not kill civilians.
Well, but the difference is you can say that in a goofy voice, but I gave you evidence of that. Cenk, I gave you evidence of that.
Cenk said you're going to respond to those points of evidence.
Yeah, like you can try to put my side in a funny voice. I'm not using a funny voice. I'm saying that Israel allows in humanitarian aid at Western pressure. Israel delayed the invasion to give people time to flee. Israel told everybody in northern Gaza that a military conquest was coming, and Israel does do door knocking, and Israel does call buildings. These are all very strange actions from somebody that is trying to maximize civilian casualties.
Yeah, they're not at all strange. They're exactly what you would do if you wanted plausible deniability as you massacred civilians and committed war crimes.
To actually put leaflets or to tell people to move away? How's that plausible deniability? Isn't that trying to take security very seriously?
Yeah, so in the beginning, when Israel had more brakes in the car, they would actually do the door knocking and the leaflets that you guys mentioned. And then there tons of civilians would die, but it was plausible deniability that was not unbelievable, right? And so I remember thinking that's not nearly good enough, but hey, they're trying, right? Now they've gotten to a point, there's no door knocking in Gaza, okay? And leaflets, what difference would it make? They all squeeze into a tiny little area. Okay, so then now when you look at the actual facts on the ground, Destiny made it seem like it was like a humanitarian thing that they moved them from the north to the south. No, that's called ethnic cleansing and mass relocation. It was actually a hallmark of the Armenian genocide that the Turks moved the Armenians to a place that was safer. Same thing with the Bataan Death March, the Chairlift Tears. All of that ethnic cleansing is the definition of a war crime. You made it seem like it was humanitarian. Then once they got them into the south, then they started bombing the south. There's literally nothing humanitarian about it. It's just one war crime that compounds another war crime. It's not even close. It's the size of Vegas. They moved it to half the size of Vegas, and then they started dropping bombs on the south. It's totally indefensible. I am speaking out against terrorism that is coming from Hamas or any Palestinian side, and I'm also speaking out against what I think is terrorism from the Israeli side, as they kill 20 times the civilians that Hamas did. You, on the other hand, seem to be saying the Palestinians do terrorism wherever they go and they're terrible and we have to keep an indefinite occupation. But the Israelis, when they kill disproportionate number of civilians and 20 times the civilians that Palestinians do, are not doing terrorism, are the good guys, and it's all just an accident. And that's why I do the voice, Destiny, because that seems ridiculous and totally not believable.
What else could Israel have done to minimize casualties? I'm curious.
Yes, I have that too.
Okay.
So, and I am not saying this today. I said it on the day of. What they should have done is something that is very hard but doable. Special forces. So it's not going in there and saying, "Hey, Hamas, it's okay that you."
No. We're talking about within how they're doing right now, as far as
No. Even day of. What is this special forces talking point is brought up over and over and over again. I don't know if it's ironically as the professional video game player. I don't know if people are watching too many movies or video games. You don't send special forces into a densely urban populated area and have 100 soldiers kill 5,000 enemy combatants. That's not how special forces work. Most of the time, these are either serving for highly specialized missions or they're serving in support roles. What do you mean send in special forces to remove Hamas? Can you tell me what that operation looks like?
Yeah, so it would involve some degree of ground invasion. I understand that, and but it would not involve indiscriminate bombings. I'm sorry, the very targeted bombings that just happened to accidentally kill all those tens of thousands of civilians. It would have involved ground invasion. Obviously, you clear some degree of path to get to the tunnels, and then you send people inside the tunnels. Now, that is very dangerous. But that's the whole point of special forces. But if you go inside the tunnels, number one, you get to Hamas much more efficiently. Number two, you might actually rescue the hostages. Instead,
by just sending people into tunnels that the enemy has built and knows the entire layout of and has every control over, you just send random special forces that, is it like a nation of Rambos?
Or the hard fighting. You don't want to actually rescue.
It's not about the hard.
You don't want to actually.
It's not about the hard fighting.
You just want to drop bombs because it feels good.
Cenk, has this type of military occupation or operation ever been performed in any part of human history? Are you referencing anything in reality when you talk about utilizing special forces this way, or is this a totally fantastical point that people have invented that has never worked?
first of all, the U.S. fought huge battles inside Iraqi cities, Mosul and otherwise, and those were horrific and deadly. But they did not incinerate Mosul. They did, and there was plenty to blame there in what happened in Mosul. But yes, they spent guys on the ground, including special forces, to get the bad guys.
That wasn't terrible. That wasn't special forces.
It partially worked, and it worked a lot better than dropping 29,000 bombs on Mosul. And remember, in Mosul, we never dropped a bomb over 500 pounds because we thought that was a war crime.
What? We dropped of course we dropped bunker busters in Iraq. Where do we get this idea that we never dropped a heavy bomb?
No, there's a giant difference. Let me clarify. Bunker busters are usually in open spaces. The 500-pound bomb rule, and 500 was a super max. And normally we wouldn't go that high either. And this is New York Times reporting. We would never drop in residential areas. And Gaza's all residential areas.
Okay, so then the bunkers and everything we're looking for are going to be under residential buildings. So what do? Do you just not bomb them? For Mosul, we had air support. We had a military force invading with a full fleet of support. It wasn't just special forces. That's absolutely not true.
No, I just told you that. I said ground forces, just like America had ground forces, and then you send the special forces inside the tunnels. If you say, it's too hard, the IDF can't handle it, they're scared, they don't actually want to fight Hamas, then what are they doing?
Why do you keep saying they're scared? First of all, you're fighting terrorists that are operating out of civilian infrastructure. These are the most cowardly ways you can ever conduct.
No, that's insane.
What's insane? What part of that was insane?
Yeah, the insane standard is, hey, you're all in an open air prison. Some of you are trying to fight back and you're in the tunnels. Oh, because some of you are trying to fight back, I'm going to bomb not the tunnels, but the civilians that aren't fighting back. But because some of you dared to fight back against your occupation, what was Hamas supposed to do? Go build a military complex in the middle of the desert somewhere in Gaza? Well, they would be bombed immediately. So it's an impossible
So they have to listen, if you're going to justify them, if you're going to justify the use of human shields, if you can justify the use of human shields,
that's let me Genko, are you trying to justify the use of human shields?
No. I reject completely the use of human shields.
That's what you just justified. You said, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to fight actually like a military, or are they supposed to operate out of civilian homes? Like,
no. Okay, listen, guys. First of all, the Israeli Defense Forces uses human shields. There's pictures and video.
Good pivot. No, you're talking about the kid on the back of the truck. This is BS, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's not BS. They put kids in front of them and literally use them as human shields. There is no equivalent in even among the awful Hamas. Instead, Hamas is in Gaza. Gaza is a giant residential area the size of Vegas. And then when you bomb their civilians, you go, well, they're in Gaza. Hamas is in Gaza. And so since they're in Gaza and civilians are in Gaza, they're using human shields? They're making us murder their citizens. They're making us drop 2,000-pound bombs on their citizens. It's Hamas's fault that we had to murder all their civilians. Well, where the hell is Hamas supposed to be? Are they supposed to be in Sweden or Bangkok?
Well, that's where their leadership. That's where their leadership goes when they make millions and millions of dollars and then conduct warfare from overseas. But except it's usually what, like Qatar or Tunisia or whatever.
Hold on. According to your guys' logic, Israel is using human shields. They are bombing from Israel, and so what is Hamas supposed to do? They're supposed to come in and bomb and attack and shoot the Israeli civilians because the dastardly IDF is using Israelis as human shields. Why didn't Israel attack from Norway or Budapest? It is
entirely possible. I do concede. I saw a lot of video footage of the festival. Maybe there were military missile installations around there and they just didn't show them on camera, but
in Gaza, Destiny.
I'm just saying that, like, the idea, I'm saying that if
because you have brutalized them for 56 straight years, you're keeping them in an open air prison, and then you go, oh, I can't believe that their fighters are in the same area. They're in the same prison.
Cenk, why do you think Gaza is treated so? Why is Gaza? Why is
dumbest argument on the planet?
Then complain to Amnesty International because they talk about Hamas using them as well. So does UN Human Rights Watch. Why is Gaza treated so much differently than the West Bank?
The West Bank is helping Israel with the occupation Palestinian Authority. That's why it's on the edge of collapse.
Wait, so I just want to go back.
Fighting back, and I think they're fighting back in an immoral and counterproductive way. But yeah, that's the giant difference.
Wait, so I want to go back to that point about human shields because it was a really good point. Jane, can you not agree with Amnesty International that Israel are using human shields? Not Israel, sorry, that Hamas are using human shields.
I do not agree with them. No.
You do not agree?
No, I do not agree. Because look, guys, under that same logic, no matter anytime anyone attacks from their own territory that has civilians, then they're using human shields. So if America launches missiles from U.S. bases in America, then the other side would say, oh, you guys are using human shields. I had to nuke all of Kansas, all of Colorado, because you guys were using human shields. You dastardly put your weapons, your nuclear weapons, your missiles in Colorado, thereby forcing me to nuke Colorado. It's America's fault for using human shields. You tell me how that logic doesn't apply.
The logic doesn't apply because we don't fire bombs and rockets from apartment complexes or use hospitals, civilian hospitals, to interrogate hostages.
Military bases because they're occupied.
Okay, so we think that it's so okay.
So like,
yeah, I understand. So you're justifying the use of human shields. That's fine. You can justify it. I think that you can actually make arguments there. It's a pretty brave position.
Yuri justifies that Israel is using human shields. You can play at this game all day long.
If Israel was launching attacks from an area,
why are you justifying the human shields that Israel is using? You sound so immoral.
First of all, it doesn't matter if Israel uses human shields or not. The reason why you use the reason
that doesn't matter.
Well, correct. It doesn't matter. Do you know why? Do you know why it doesn't matter? It doesn't matter if Israel uses human shields because Hamas wants to kill civilians anyway. So why would you waste your time, right? If you put a civilian in front of an IDF tank, Hamas goes, oh shit, a 2-for-1 special. Obviously, human shields won't work on the Israeli side.
Civilians, but Israel kills 20 times the civilians that Hamas does. But golly gee, they didn't want to kill them. You see how it's sophistry?
It's not sophistry. It's called collateral damage. This is how warfare works, unfortunately. Sophistry is pretending. Sophistry is having never watched the movie Black Hawk Down and assuming that you can send 20 special forces agents through unknown tunnels and have them beat all the terrorists. That's what sophistry is. Yeah.
Destiny, are you basing your looking at how the IDF should operate based on video games and movies?
That's what it seems like when people talk about special forces. It's a very video game movie approach. The idea that if you send in some special forces, they could beat a whole bunch of people. But historically, I think there were two really good examples where the United States tried this and it ended in disaster. And Black Hawk movie was one of the movies made about that, where Jesus, I haven't actually even seen the movie, but that shows that like when special forces got pinned down in a bad area and they had to bring in a ton of support and way more people ended up dying as a result of all of this shit because of like what happens. It was Mogadishu, I think was the area it was called. But yeah, you don't just send in unsupported special forces unless it's for very...
I didn't say unsupported.
What?
I didn't say unsupported.
Okay, but no, but when you talk about support, the support is not special forces going in on their own and fighting and killing terrorists. Special forces either work in support roles or they do highly specialized missions. For instance, like flying into Pakistan and killing Osama bin Laden. That would be an example of like a specialized mission that special forces would do. There is no example in the history of all of warfare where special forces go into to a city, an enemy city, and kill all the terrorists. That just never happens. So the idea that this is brought up as some serious like pushback on how Israel should be conducting military operations has no basis in reality, has no basis in military operations, has no basis in how any country operates. It's just again, like you said, an impossible standard to hold Israel to. And then to do all of this and to say that like Israel needs to draw a ceasefire or Israel needs to stop the fighting and Hamas should be allowed to stand, or we should give, earlier you were saying we should give more power. Okay, you were saying we should give more power to the Palestinian Authority to go in and clear out Gaza, and now you're telling me that the Palestinian Authority has no legitimacy in the West Bank because you wouldn't answer the question of why is the West Bank treated better than the Gaza Strip, and it's because less terrorism comes from the West Bank within the Gaza Strip, but you don't want to answer that because obviously you would see that the citizens of Gaza have some responsibility for why the blockade exists there. It's just there's like this impossible set of conditions given to Israel where we're unironically telling them to negotiate a peace deal that the Palestinians already walked away from 23 years ago against a group of people that have been shooting rockets into this country every single fucking day for like the past 20 years. It's just like no other country on earth would be held to this standard of negotiation. It's insane.
Do you know why? Because no other country is occupying 5 million people. Like you occupy them and then you go, can you believe that this one country has these people fighting back when they're prisoners? And they should know that they're prisoners.
So strange that nobody cared when they were being
prisoners.
Crazy that nobody cared when they were being occupied by Egypt and Jordan from 1948 to 1967. Crazy that Resolution 242 from the UN only called for the Palestinian state to be created after Jordan and Egypt lost that territory in a war. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So let's summarize here as we get to the 2-hour mark. So, first of all, but before the summary, let me just say one quick thing. Because you misrepresented something I said. I said the Palestinian Authority is losing credibility now because they've not gotten anything through diplomatic solutions. They have not gotten anything by cooperating and coordinating with the Israeli government. So they're on dangerous grounds now of being toppled. I said that they would have enormous credibility and be able to drive out Hamas, which is the only realistic plan to drive out Hamas, if they were able to land a two-state solution and they were the heroes that created Palestine. Then they would have the credibility to rule the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. That's an actual peace plan. But so far, now in summary, you're saying if someone took any of
wait, don't summarize your position. Don't summarize my position. Summarize your position. I don't think you understand my position.
I'm going to summarize what I think happened in this conversation.
Okay, I'll summarize yours as well after. Sure.
If someone were to take your land, you would grab the gun behind you and try to shoot and kill them. Now you say, but the Palestinians, if they do that, they're terrorists and they deserve to be indefinitely occupied. They're terrorists wherever they go. They're violent. It's their fault. They always do the attacking, and they should know their role as prisoners indefinitely under Israeli occupation. But if Israel goes to fight back against October 7th, well, you can't be expected to fight back by doing hard things like going inside the tunnels. So let's just evaporate the civilians instead. Murder tens of thousands of civilians because Israel is not the violent ones. And state violence doesn't count. That violence is just defending yourself. But when the Palestinians defend themselves, terrorists! Now, you would do the same thing, you agreed, but they are not allowed to do it. They are dastardly terrorists, and they should be occupied forever and ever. But Israel can bomb giant residential areas, 29,000 bombs, 2,000-pound bombs. But that is not violence. That is not targeting civilians. That's just, golly gee, I had to do it to clear a path in. So that is as absurd as it can be, and everyone it can recognize it.
Destiny, I think you want to respond to that because I don't think that's probably what you meant.
Yeah, I don't know. Most of the people just don't want to operate in reality because I think that this particular conflict lets us read a lot of like ideological leanings into what should happen. But at the end of the day, nobody actually gives a f about the Palestinian people or the Israeli people, which is why all these crazy positions come out.
If
you obviously you don't want peace. Okay, that's clear. Because nothing that you're saying is rooted in reality. Nothing you're saying has any like bearing with the conditions on the ground.
But your plan is indefinite occupation. How does that get to peace?
Shit. Did I reveal that? Did I say that in this conversation that my goal would be indefinite occupation?
You said after October 7th, we can't do a peace deal right now.
Sorry, you're misunderstanding a prescription for a description. You need to accurately describe what's going on before you can prescribe what ought to happen. The reality is after October 7th, the appetite in Israel for peace is very low. That's just a fact that you have to contend with, because if you want to create real solutions for people, you've got to meet the people where they're at. That's just how it goes. That's why support for a two-state solution dropped off after the Second Intifada. I'm not saying that's right or it's good. I'm just saying that, of course, as terrorist attacks happen, this is how people respond. Just like how you've said over and over again, and I'm trying to be good faith and charitable when I am confronting you, you're saying over and over again, this is why the people in Gaza are attacking, this is why you're doing terrorists. I hope, or I think you're not justifying the attacks, although sometimes it sounds like it. You're just saying that when you do this...
You're definitely justifying Israel killing those civilians, though.
Thank you. Nice try, Jake. Okay. When you're saying this... No, it's literally not. When you're saying that the people are doing this because of the conditions on the ground, I'm merely saying the same thing for Israel. For some reason, ultra-far-right Zionists can't understand the Palestinian position, and people that sim for Palestinians but don't understand what's going on the ground can't seem to understand Israel's position. You'll say these things over and over again that like, well, wouldn't it be fair that like people in Palestine are really upset because of the military occupation? And then when I say, yeah, of course, but don't you think it's also kind of weird that there are rockets flying in every day? Now there's like 50 million justifications for why that's actually not a big deal and it actually doesn't matter. And that's bizarre to me. My situation, or I'm sorry, I
condemned it.
That's hardly. My solution for this is what needs to happen if you want peace in the Middle East, and anything outside of these boundaries is delusional, okay? Number one, Iran has to come to the table, and they need to stop, okay? No more funding shit in Gaza. No more funding shit with Hezbollah. No more funding shit with the Houthis, okay? This has to stop. Iran has to be part of any future conversation.
They have to surrender first. Not only the Palestinians, but the Iranians have to surrender first. This sounds super realistic.
I didn't say surrender. I'm sorry, but no offense. Iran's lost, okay? I'm sorry. They are the losers of the Middle East. Everybody looks at them. Everybody laughs. They try to mine the sea to the south of them. They try to shoot shit into Saudi Arabia. But Iran, the Ayatollah is such a loser. Even the people in Iran hate the government. Okay,
how are you going to get Iran? How are you going to get the Iranian government to stop funding Hamas?
In terms of what those talks look like, I imagine there probably needs to be a lot of U.S. leadership. I imagine there probably needs to be Saudi Arabian leadership, and there's probably other Arab states, especially Qatar, that have to be brought in as well. I don't know what concessions need to make in terms of the easing of sanctions, in terms of allowing the UN to investigate potential nuclear reactors. I don't know what all we can offer, but Jesus, in 76 to 79, what we gave Egypt, how many billions of dollars to tell them, listen, stop fighting with Israel. We've done it with Egypt. We've done it with other people. Can't we do it with Iran? It must be possible at some point, right? So one is support from Iran has to stop, and that's number one. That has to be the case. Number two, Israel needs to make a concerted effort towards peace, and this might mean things like you are going to have to grin and bear a couple of terror attacks because they're going to happen, and it can't be the case that every time Israel loses 3 soldiers, they go in and they kill 50 civilians. This has been the history of Israel and Palestine for like 75 that cannot be happening over and over and over again, because obviously it foments hatred on both sides. Okay, so Israel needs to bear it. They need to work towards peace. They need to be willing to make some concessions, like dump some of these enclave settlements. Okay, you have to be willing to dump some of these. You can't continue to expand them because the settlements are obviously severely hamper the peace process. And if you want to keep some of them, when you start to do your land swaps, you need to be willing to offer a lot for places like Hebron. Okay, you can't have these enclaves out here that destroy the continuous state. Okay, on the Palestinian side, okay, there needs to be a hardcore de-radicalization effort. You have to acknowledge that the Palestinian people want violence. Not Hamas, not the PLO, and not just the terrorists, but Palestinians en masse think that fighting will serve their end. That thought needs to be wiped out. That cannot be the case for them thinking that, because as long as they have that idea, same thing with Israel having that idea, as long as that idea exists, peace will never happen. So whether that means the UN stops sending them textbooks and TV shows with Mickey Mouse, the evil Jew, in it, or whether that means there is an effort made by surrounding Arab states to communicate more, whether that means certain types of humanitarian aid are increased, although Gaza is already one of the largest per capita recipients of aid, literally in the entire world, whether that means the easing restrictions on some parts of like the border there from Israel, these are the things that need to happen to slowly work towards some two-state solution. And then hopefully at some point the Palestinian people are willing to elect somebody who's not a boss, because by the way, if a two-state solution ever happens in the future, it's never going to be with a boss. He already lost control of the Gaza Strip once. Why the hell would we give it back to him again? Why would you give him arms and encourage him to go into civil war in the Gaza Strip, assuming that one, he'll even win, and then two, that he'll manage to retain control of it, but he already lost control of it one time. Those are the things that need to happen if you actually want to see a two-state solution come about in the future. Anything else is cope, and I'll fight on any of those points.
That's now. I want to push in 2 points, and I'll go to Cenk to give him a chance to respond. 2 points: Iranian government and de-radicalization. First of all, Iranian government. You said your whole point of peace, of solution for peace, has to be based on reality. I think what you're saying about pushing the US to work against Iran doesn't seem to be based on reality. I mean, they were going to work on a deal a couple of months ago, so I'm not sure how much that's based on reality. And number two, yeah.
So for real quick, so unfortunately in the United States, and this sucks, okay, is that our presidents are 4-year presidents, which is incredibly annoying, or 8-year presidents. So what that means is sometimes, unfortunately, you have to treat the strongest person in the world, sometimes how you would treat a U.S. police officer, you have to treat them like a schizophrenic person that could kill you at any point in time, okay? Because unfortunately, sometimes the U.S. will say things like under Obama, hey, listen, Iran, we're going to unfreeze some assets, we're going to work with you on some shit, and hopefully you guys don't pursue nuclear weapons, let's investigate. And the next president might say, actually, I changed my mind on all of that. The United States, in my opinion, as not being an expert in Iranian history, but in my opinion, the United States has been close at some points to having a peaceful outcome with Iran, and we up for stupid reasons. When George Bush, for whatever reason, decided to throw Iran on the axis of evil, what a stupid decision. And it set us back so far in terms of the progress we've made with Iran. The joint pact of agreement of action or whatever, the Iranian nuclear deal that Obama did was historic. That was amazing. We keep them from pursuing nuclear weapons. We slowly ease the sanctions on their economy. Hopefully the citizens don't hate us as much. And then Trump rolled that back. So I don't think it's impossible that the United States can pursue normalizing some type of relationship with Iran. We just have to not have schizophrenic leadership that is changing deals that we're making every time a new president comes into office, in my opinion.
Okay, so let me push on the next question. But anyway, that was the point to really promote your presidency, Ron. But let me push on the de-radicalization point now. I don't think the people in the Palestinian Authority actually, in their hearts, really want violence. They're in that space in Gaza, and they have their only hope really is Hamas. There is no other feasible hope. Who are they going to hope for? There's already government. That doesn't even make sense. In their hearts of hearts, they don't actually want violence. If there were to be another solution of peace, they would probably want that, something reasonable.
I can only go by polling data and what exists on the ground. Now, today, funnily enough, if you look at the support for Hamas or the October 7th attacks, in the Gaza Strip, that has fallen, I think, to around 55%. Now, in the West Bank, I think it's risen up to 80%, but it makes sense why. People in Gaza, after getting, completely bombed and obliterated, and all of their citizens, half of them being, expelled basically from northern Gaza, are like, you know what? The October 7th attacks actually weren't that good. This sucks. Now, the people in the West Bank, the support for the October 7th attacks for them, that has risen to 80%. I'm not trying to say that like Palestinians are inherently violent people. If you want to talk about inherently violent people, you could almost make the same argument for Israel, right? The entire existence of them in that region, whether we're talking about the Irgun that existed, prior to the IDF, whether we're talking about the entire formation of Israel and the territorial expansion, blah, blah, blah. You can make that argument of Israel. I'm just saying we have to understand that right now, Palestinians feel like if we fight, we will win and we'll have a better outcome. That thought needs to be eliminated. They cannot think that, because as long as they think that, why would they push for peace? Like, what's the motivation? If you think fighting is better, why would you try to negotiate with an adversary that you want expelled from the region?
I think we really need to give Cenk a chance to respond.
Yeah,
as well, then.
Yeah. So look, I'm hoping that this is the final point here, but I thought we were going to end on some degree of agreement, because I agreed with what Destiny said about Israel, right? That they have to stop killing civilians disproportionately, and eventually get to popular agreement on pursuing peace instead. And I agree with him on our schizophrenia regarding Iran. I thought Obama did a great Iran deal with Iran, and Trump and Biden have been horrific in getting out of that deal, and I think it's led to more violence and more support for Hamas from Iran, etc. But we have a fundamental disagreement on how to get to peace. So Destiny laid out his idea of you have to de-radicalize the Palestinians first. Hamas has to surrender. Iran has to not surrender, but say we're just magically going to give up every kind of power we have in the Middle East. And the way that they have power, we have nukes, we have overwhelming military. They have these groups, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, etc., that they fund, and we can call them terrorism, and that's fine. But they're not. So that's, to me, seems enormously unrealistic. Some sort of massive unilateral surrender on one side, and once they are beaten to a complete submission, then we'll come to the peace table. And then if Mahmoud Abbas is not good enough, the guy's been working with the Israelis for 20 years. If that's not a partner for peace, then you're saying there is no partner for peace. Oh, you're going to wait for a magical Mother Teresa to rise up out of a people that have been occupied for 56 years, and they're all going to rally around that Mother Teresa who loves the Israelis with all of her heart, and then we're going to do a peace deal, is basically saying we're not going to do a peace deal. And so my thesis is, no, the peace deal leads to moderation. You want de-radicalization, so do I. But as we showed in the Egypt-Israel peace deal, the de-radicalization comes after the peace deal, not before the peace deal. If you try to put it before the peace deal, it becomes an impossible standard that can never be met. And that's why Dick Cheney, when he said we don't negotiate with evil, when it came to Iran willing to give up their uranium program, he said he wanted them first to completely give up everything they believed in before he would even negotiate with them. He blew it. We could have taken their uranium out. You don't negotiate with angels who have already agreed that they love you. You negotiate with your enemies who hate you. That's why you're in a war. So yes, a lot of Palestinians do not like the Israelis, expecting them to like their occupiers. To say that it's unreasonable is an understatement. Instead, get the two sides who hate each other. And yes, tons of Israelis hate the Palestinians and are voting for people who occupy them, bomb them, kill them, etc. But I don't hold it against the Israeli civilians. It's a power dynamic. The powerful do that to the powerless in almost every circumstance. And the powerless usually fight back with water pipes turned into terrible, stupid bombs that barely work. That is the power dynamic. The way to get beyond that dynamic is to get to a peace deal that then de-radicalizes both populations. And we've already done it before in this exact circumstance, Israel, Egypt. That's why doing a peace deal roughly along the 2000 proposal with the Palestinian Authority is the only plausible way to get to peace. Further bombing, further invasion, further war crimes, further occupation is never, ever going to get to a peace deal.
Destiny, do you want to respond, and then we're going to finish off?
I mean, when we talk about massive unilateral surrender on one side, I mean, like the writing is on the wall. Like, Iran has already lost so much influence. They know this. Syria is still like a borderline failed state. Lebanon is barely a country right now. Yemen is, you know, in disarray, right? You're comparing these countries. So, like, do we really expect them to give up to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, even Qatar? Like, come on, like, the writing is on the wall. This is a foregone conclusion. We know what the future is going to look like. There is no future where Iran and Syria are leading politics in the Middle East. It's not happening. Ever since Saddam Hussein was gone, like, the idea of some Shia power that was going to overthrow everybody else and leave this, we're done. Not only is that gone, everybody else has basically recognized it. And I think Iran is on the way, at least the people are, but we'll see, you know, what that happens in the future, I guess. Yeah, you talk about like a boss and saying, well, if we can't work with a boss, then blah, blah, blah. Like, the Palestinians don't want a boss. He's incredibly unpopular. They won't even allow a boss to negotiate on their behalf. And to say that de-radicalization comes after a peace deal, I just don't know if that's ever happened in literally all of human history. Nobody talked, well, somebody talked about de-radicalizing Germany. I think it was that if we just give them what they want, maybe they'll stop invading. I think there was a particular term for that. It might have been called cheese man. I don't remember what it was, but I know that we tried it and it didn't work. We didn't de-radicalize Japan by letting them run shit on their own and infinitely genocide Chinese people and Koreans. We didn't, you know, defeat Italy and Germany by just giving them what they wanted. You have to go in. Sometimes you've got to invade. You've got to be heavy-handed. You've got to do what you need to do. And unfortunately, when you've got a highly radicalized population that's being funded from abroad by a ton of different people to do radical Islamic jihadist attacks, just negotiating peace and saying hopefully everything will go well once we, you know, give them everything is probably not going to be a strong selling point to Israeli citizens that have to live in the shadow of constant attacks from Gaza and a potential nuclear threat from Iran.
Cenk, do you want to respond, or should we finish off?
No, I think our positions are totally clear. And yes, the good people, you know how we got de-radicalized Japan and Germany? Well, number one, we dropped nukes. I don't know that we want to do that. That was the old bad days. That's why we came up with the concept of war crimes, and we try not to do that. But ultimately, what de-radicalized them wasn't even the nukes. It was that we did the Marshall Plan, and we rebuilt our enemies and turned them into our top allies. That the path of peace and diplomacy is not just one that is more moral, it's one that's more diplomatic, strategic, and intelligent, and has shown success over and over again. The path of war leads to only more war. But I appreciate you guys. I appreciate Ellie for you, you know, organizing this conversation. I hope that people got something out of it. I think they did, and I think you did a great job moderating. And Destiny, I appreciate that we exchange these ideas, and we have to, so that people can learn from it. So
hopefully this was a productive conversation. Thanks, Cenk, and thanks, Destiny. Just at one quick point before we finish, Destiny, would you potentially have a debate with Norman Finkelstein?
If you wanted to, yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah, thanks, and thanks, Cenk. I like shouting at you. You're a fun, energetic guy. So yeah, it's always fun, even if we super disagree. And listen, even though I think you're crazy for it, I wish you the best of luck on your presidential campaign. If for no other reason, because I think it'd be awesome to watch you shout at other politicians and stuff. You're always fun to watch, even when I disagree with you. So good luck on everything.
Yeah. By the way, if imagine me in a debate with Biden or Trump, could be fun.
Be a lot of fun. It would be. Yeah.
And by the way, guys, thank you for the plug. If you are dissatisfied with our choices being Biden and Trump, you can just give $1 as a form of protest at jankforamerica.com. Let's get some better alternatives. Thank you, guys.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one, guys.
I want to jump
surrounding Israel felt the exact same way.
So why are the Palestinians doing?
Probably around 19,000 casualties at this point, 20,000 casualties.
Keeps going in this direction, the Palestinian Authority is going to lose credibility in the West Bank, and then all of a sudden, whether it's Hamas or another terrorist group, they're going to take over the West.
Everybody, and I do want to take you back out to this video from a little bit earlier. This is over in the Netherlands. As we are following the breaking news here, the World Court will not throw out genocide charges against Israel for its military offensive in Gaza, but also will not order a ceasefire. Announcing its decision on the eve of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, the International Court of Justice, which you saw in that video, did demand that Israel try to contain death and damage in its military offensive. That decision comes after South Africa asked the court to order Israel to halt its operations claiming genocide. The decision in the Netherlands by the 17 judges is considered to be an interim one, and it could take years for the full case brought by South Africa to be considered. Israel has rejected those genocide allegations, and it asked the court to throw out the charges, which, as you heard there, the court did refuse to do. We did hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu in a quick minute statement that he did put out just a short time ago. I do want to play that for you here, raw and unfiltered, on Live Now from Fox.
Israel's commitment to international law is unwavering. Equally unwavering is our sacred commitment to continue to defend our country and defend our people. Like every country, Israel has an inherent right to defend itself. The vile attempt to deny Israel this fundamental right is blatant discrimination against the Jewish state, and it was justly rejected. The charge of genocide leveled against Israel is not only false, it's outrageous, and decent people everywhere should reject it. On the eve of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, I again pledge as Israel's Prime Minister, never again. Israel will continue to defend itself against Hamas, a genocidal terror organization. On October 7th, Hamas perpetrated the most horrific atrocities against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and it vows to repeat these atrocities again and again and again. Our war is against Hamas terrorists, not against Palestinian civilians. We will continue to facilitate humanitarian assistance and to do our utmost to keep civilians out of harm's way, even as Hamas uses civilians as human shields. We will continue to do what is necessary to defend our country and defend our people.
And that was Prime Minister Netanyahu there speaking in Israel this morning right after that decision was announced by the World Court. Again, the United Nations highest court saying they will not throw out those genocide charges against Israel. They will hear the case, but they did stop short of actually calling for a ceasefire and essentially said that Israel needs to do everything it can to stop the loss of life and damage there during its invasion of Gaza. Now in its fourth month, and of course starting there with the October 7th attacks by Hamas, a terrorist organization, killing about 1,200, possibly more people over in Israel and taking more than 200 people hostages. At last check, we know that more than 100 people are still being held captive by Hamas.
We want to bring into the conversation right now some of our friends here that we've brought on so many different times to discuss all of this, and that includes former Ambassador Kurt Volker and National Security Analyst Hal Kempfer. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us here. You heard there in Peter's report some of those sound bites from officials like Ned Price and even Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Good luck, have fun, and beat them,
kind of
probably.
praising the work from the UN Relief and Works Agency there in Gaza. And now this news coming today from the State Department temporarily pausing all federal funding that already has not been allocated to the agency over these allegations. And I want to go over the allegations before I get into the questioning. One, that at least one Israeli hostage taken by Hamas on October 7th was kept for a time in the home of an UNRWA worker in Gaza. And two, that teachers at UNRWA schools in Gaza told students about the October 7th attacks and celebrated them in classrooms afterwards. These are schools that receive U.S. taxpayer funding each and every year here. I'll start with you, Kurt. You know, what is the response going to be? You heard there from John Kirby saying U.S. officials don't believe the entire organization supports terrorism, but this doesn't sound good, does it?
It sounds horrible. You know, let's be clear, it sounds horrible. And the fact that even John Kirby in the podium is saying we are now no longer providing U.S. funding for UNRWA indicates that they understand the scale of the problem and the scope of the problem. This is not something that U.S. taxpayers could ever support. And I think what's lacking in this, and watching the clips that you just showed, there's a lack of clarity coming from the administration on what we do think. It is very much negativity, very much defensive. Well, this is not true, that's not true. We're cautious about that, we're careful about that. What is the actual position of the administration? What do we want? And then how are we going about trying to achieve it?
You know, Hal, to Kurt's point, U.S. officials, you know, as recent as November, praised UNRWA and the work they're doing in Gaza. So is there a disconnect there? Kind of to Kurt's point, Antony Blinken visited UNRWA headquarters in Jordan in November and praised the work despite these allegations. And Hal, I got to add, these allegations did not just surface today. They've been out there for quite a while.
Andrew, they have been out there for quite a while. And this reinforces some of the stuff that's been coming from Israel on this, where they've been talking about it. You know, you have to look at this in a broad context that this really gets into, to use a Watergate term, what did they know and when did they know it? This gets into the whole information flow of what the United Nations has been dealing with across the board in terms of understanding what's happening on the ground. It's going to turn out that maybe a dozen, you know, they've been fired. I don't know how well they're going to be interviewed. I don't know what the extent of the investigation will be. Right now, the agency responsible is investigating itself, which leaves me a little bit skeptical. But the other side is going to be, okay, so they were directly involved. How many others knew and averted their eyes or passively went along with this? I think this will be a much broader hit. It does reinforce what Israel's been saying, but I think some of these incidents where, you know, the Israelis, you know, like Israeli tanks have fired at a UN facility in Khan Yunis, or some of these white flag incidents, they're going to have to be looked at again, because now we're realizing some of the reporting may have been deeply skewed.
Yeah, you know, I want to play just a quick soundbite from a spokesperson there at the UN about these allegations and get you both to respond. Let's listen to this.
The Secretary General is horrified by this news and asked Mr. Lazzarini to investigate this matter swiftly and to ensure that any UNRWA employee shown to have participated or abetted in what transpired on October 7th or in any other criminal activity be terminated immediately and referred for potential criminal prosecution. To protect the agency's ability to deliver humanitarian assistance, Commissioner General Lazzarini has taken the decision to immediately terminate the contracts of all these staff members and launch an investigation in order to establish the truth without delay. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza who rely on UNRWA's humanitarian work, who rely on humanitarian assistance, even more now than they did before. It is the work that UNRWA does remains critical today, and we very much hope that while UNRWA that a number of things have to happen at the same time. UNRWA has to ask OIOS to do this investigation. The Commissioner General, I think, has taken very swift and strong measures right away. at the same time, our humanitarian work needs to continue. Lives depend on it.
All right, so that was the spokesman there, Stefan Dujarric, at the United Nations today, saying the investigation continues. We also know the UN fired 12 of its staff believed to be involved in all of this. State Department officials have also briefed certain members of Congress on what they know about the allegations that UNRWA workers were involved in October 7th, though they do not have a list of names here. I mean, does the responsibility or accountability need to start at the top, Kurt? I mean, does Antonio Guterres, need to come out more forcefully about this? Do people below him need to resign? This is really damning.
Well, it is damning. And even in what you just heard from the spokesman there is an acknowledgement that UNRWA workers were actually involved in things that are completely inappropriate for any UN workers and anyone that is even partially paid by U.S. taxpayers. So his recognition of that is good. What's not clear is what they are going to do about it. For the UN Secretary General, I think he needs to speak about it. I think it's not his job on the line. This is all levels well below him. But he needs to make clear that this is entirely unacceptable. And he actually needs to take UN, UNRWA out of the role of providing humanitarian support in Gaza and in Israel, and put somebody else in charge, like the UN Human Rights Agency or Refugee Affairs, anybody else who would have more credibility. Because right now, the perception is that they are completely penetrated by Hamas and therefore very partial in this conflict against Israel. So the UN needs to take this agency out and put somebody else in, maybe the World Food Program, that would be in a better position to actually provide impartial support to the civilian population without taking sides in the conflict.
Hal, to that point, I mean, can you still say at this point, like John Kirby did on January 4th at the White House briefing, UNRWA is doing important work? Secretary Blinken just said yesterday he was in Angola. The work the UN is performing in Gaza is quite literally life-saving, and no one else can do it. No one else is doing it. Can you say that still with what we now know about these allegations, or is there a disconnect?
Well, Andrew, obviously, as we picked up on disconnect, there's a strategic communications disconnect right now. I think they're going to roll back a lot of their language praising UNRWA until they have a better sense of what's going on. But it's going to be seen as to how permeated the Hamas influence, the Hamas connection is in UNRWA. It's certainly, the Gaza Strip. The thing is, they have a lot of what we call local hires, if you will. These are local Palestinians are there. In fact, the vast majority are local hires because they live there. This is where they operate. And with that, when you look at how Hamas was situated, being the de jure de facto government in Gaza, it's not surprising that this would pop up. But now they're going to have to look at the entire chain of command. Not just the 12 that were fired, but everybody over them, all the oversight, all the supervision, and as I mentioned earlier, all the information that they've been operating with. Secretary Guterres has been, he's used some rather strong language in condemning Israel throughout this entire action. And now with this, the question is, what information was he operating off of? What was he getting from the Gaza Strip? And was that skewed? Was that scripted by Hamas at certain points?
Just a last point on this, Kurt, last question to you. So the funding's been cut off temporarily. Does it need to be cut off permanently?
We don't know. I think temporarily cutting it off is the right decision because we need to understand what's actually happening. Just as Hal was just saying, there are a lot of questions now that arise as to who was doing what and who acted on what basis. So we need to figure that out.
Okay.
But I do think that the U.S. needs to have a much higher standard for support for the United Nations in its activities like this, if, in fact, we have reason to believe that they are acting in a very skewed and impartial way in a conflict like this.
All right. While we have you both, I do want to move on. This is also United Nations related as well. Their top court, their body, the International Court of Justice there at The Hague, hearing this case today, and it was brought by South Africa claiming Israel in its offensive against Hamas in Gaza is committing genocide against Palestinians. We have this live now. Look there, and I know it's very dark. In southern Israel, looking into Gaza. I just want to go into some of the findings today. This decision by the ICJ, they declined to order Israel to cease military operations in Gaza while it continues to weigh South Africa's claim the country is committing genocide against Palestinians. So Kurt and Hal, they declined to order Israel to stop, but they didn't dismiss the case outright. Is this a partial victory for both? Hal, you first.
No, this is atrocious. So the Palestinian terrorist group Hamas is trying to eliminate Israel. They don't accept Israel's right to exist as a country. They don't accept the Israeli people's right to exist where they live. That is genocide. And to accuse Israel of genocide in defending itself against the kinds of attacks that they face with Hamas is just appalling. And if you want to understand genocide, just look at what Russia is doing against Ukraine. They are torturing people, they are occupying territory, they are using rape as a tool of war. They are castrating prisoners of war. It is absolutely appalling what the Russians are doing. That's what Hamas is doing against Israel. And so to think of this as somehow that either Ukraine or Israel is a perpetrator in this, that they are guilty of genocide, is absolutely absurd. They are the victims of those attacks against them.
You know, Hal, to that point, I was reminding the viewers because tomorrow is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Israel, of course, was created in the wake of the devastating atrocities of the Holocaust. The very day before that, today, they are facing genocide allegations against themselves brought by South Africa for what they are doing as they, effectuate their war against Hamas in Gaza. I mean, what do you think? 75 years ago, the founders of Israel would have thought about that claim.
Well, they would probably think it was ironic, but then again, I got to tell you, it's generally, if you go back in history, it's a lot of pragmatic leaders, and some of them would say, not surprised, that some country would do that. I mean, they've had to fight off, little enemies trying to wipe out Israel, but also political enemies trying to politically neutralize Israel for a very long period of time. So they probably wouldn't be surprised. I don't think they're surprised now. But the interesting thing about the ruling is, it had 6 parts to it. About half of them, 3 of them, were simply abide by the International Treaty on Genocide. Well, they already say they're abiding by that. In fact, most everything there, they say they're abiding by. In fact, the International Treaty on Genocide wouldn't exist without Israel. That's why it was developed 75 years ago. And then other things like preserving evidence, trying to get aid into the Palestinian area in Gaza. All of these are things that they're doing. So I think there's an interesting point to this. They're facing it, but it could be a couple, 3 years, maybe. I don't know. I defer to Kurt on this with the speed with which the ICJ moves, but it's somewhat glacial at times. I think the big part of the thing is it didn't ask for an immediate ceasefire, which gives, pardon the expression, maneuver room, if you will, for Israel on the military side to do some things that they need to do. I'll also say one thing, and it's a little bit far-filled, but the fact that the ICJ had such a thoughtful decision that it didn't immediately put Israel in an incredibly difficult or impossible situation is something that helps around the world. I mean, there's a big ICJ ruling in the South China Sea that the Philippines is trying to enforce. I can tell you that there's some folks in the Pacific that kind of breathed a sigh of relief when they saw that. I know it doesn't sound connected, but the ICJ plays an important role, and when they can provide that sort of thoughtful, thorough sounding board, if you will, for the international community, I think that really helps in a lot of different ways.
All right, this is how Bibi Netanyahu responded to the news today. Let's listen.
Israel's commitment to international law is unwavering. Equally unwavering is our sacred commitment to continue to defend our country and defend our people. Like every country, Israel has an inherent right to defend itself. The vile attempt to deny Israel this fundamental right is blatant discrimination against the Jewish state, and it was justly rejected. The charge of genocide leveled against Israel is not only false, it's outrageous, and decent people everywhere should reject it. On the eve of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, I again pledge as Israel's Prime Minister, never again. Israel will continue to defend itself against Hamas, a genocidal terror organization. On October 7th, Hamas perpetrated the most horrific atrocities against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and it vows to repeat these atrocities again and again and again. Our war is against Hamas terrorists, not against Palestinian civilians. We will continue to facilitate humanitarian assistance and to do our utmost to keep civilians out of harm's way, even as Hamas uses civilians as human shields. We will continue to do what is necessary to defend our country and defend our people.
Kurt, just lastly to you there, say this went the opposite against Israel today. It's very hard to enforce these rulings from these, international, multinational bodies like the ICJ, UN's top court there as well. Obviously, there's been well-documented cases and a history of, the UN's antagonism toward Israel as well here. So what happens next, do you think, in this case?
I think what Prime Minister Netanyahu just said there was actually quite strong. Israel has to take responsibility for its own security. This is a state. It has to be protected. The state has primary responsibility for that. It has allies, it has friends around the world, but they have to do that. And that is the primary thing. And attacks against that are going to be seen as terrorist attacks by anybody, but Hamas is the one that is conducting them. As for the UN, I would like to see the UN get into a position where it would actually be vocal in support of Israel's right to exist, its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, and then talk about the basis for what a peace would be. Because what we hear right now is equivalence on both sides, equivalence of Hamas terrorists and the Israeli state fighting each other. It is not equivalence. It is terrorism versus a state trying to protect its own people. These are not the same thing. And I think we need to have that recognized as a basis for how we deal with this issue in the future.
All right, gentlemen, I'll leave it at that. Ambassador Kurt Volker and Hal Kemper, thanks so much for being with us here on this Friday night. Have a good weekend. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Penalty yields back. Judge, why wasn't it fixed last year?
Pardon me?
Why wasn't it fixed last year? I mean, the gentlelady talked about working in a bipartisan fashion to fix this problem. Why wasn't it fixed last year?
Why wasn't it fixed last year?
You talked about the concerns and how we have to work together to fix it. I'm just wondering, why wasn't it fixed last year? Because they didn't need bipartisan.
Majority of the population in Gaza. Articles 73 74, and 75 of the Rules of Court. In accordance with the usual practice, I shall not read the introductory paragraphs of the order which set out the procedural history of the case. I shall also omit or summarize some other paragraphs. I shall therefore begin the reading of the order at paragraph 13. In the order, the Court begins by recalling the immediate context in which the present case came before it. It observes that on 7 October 2023, Hamas and other armed groups present in the Gaza Strip carried out an attack in Israel, killing more than 1,200 persons, injuring thousands, and abducting some 240 people, many of whom continue to be held hostage. Following this attack, Israel launched a large-scale military operation in Gaza by land, air, and sea, which is causing massive civilian casualties, extensive destruction of civilian infrastructure, and the displacement of the overwhelming majority of the population in Gaza. The Court is acutely aware of the extent of the human tragedy that is unfolding in the region and is deeply concerned about the continuing loss of life and human suffering. The ongoing conflict in Gaza has been addressed in the framework of several organs and specialized agencies of the United Nations. In particular, reservations have been adopted by the General Assembly and the Security Council of the United Nations, referring to many aspects of the conflict. The scope of the present case submitted to the Court, however, is limited, as South Africa has instituted these proceedings under the Genocide Convention. The Court then turns to the conditions needed to be fulfilled in order for it to indicate provisional measures. With respect to the question of prima facie jurisdiction, the Court observes that it may indicate provisional measures only if the provisions relied on by the applicant appear prima facie to afford a basis on which its jurisdiction could be founded, but it need not satisfy itself in a definitive manner that it has jurisdiction as regards the merits of the case. In the present case, South Africa seeks to found the jurisdiction of the Court on Article 36, Paragraph 1 of the Statute of the Court and on Article 9 of the Genocide Convention. The Court must therefore first determine whether those provisions prima facie confer upon it jurisdiction to rule on the merits of the case, enabling it, if the other necessary conditions are fulfilled, to indicate provisional measures. Article 9 of the Genocide Convention provides, I quote, "Disputes between the contracting parties relating to the interpretation, application, or fulfillment of the present convention, including those relating to the responsibility of a state for genocide or for any of the other acts enumerated in Article 3, shall be submitted to the International Court of Justice at the request of any of the parties to the dispute." End of quote. South Africa and Israel are both parties to the Genocide Convention, and neither of them has entered a reservation to Article 9 or any other provision of the Convention. The Court then recalls that Article 9 of the Genocide Convention makes its jurisdiction conditional on the existence of a dispute relating to the interpretation, application, or fulfillment of the Convention. A dispute is a disagreement on a point of law or fact, a conflict of legal views or of interest between parties. In order for a dispute to exist, it must be shown that the claim of one party is positively opposed by the other. The two sides must hold clearly opposite views concerning the question of the performance or non-performance of certain international obligations. To determine whether a dispute exists in the present case, the Court cannot limit itself to noting that one of the parties maintains the Convention applies while the other denies it. Since South Africa has invoked as a basis for the Court's jurisdiction the compromissory clause of the Genocide Convention, the Court must also ascertain at the present stage of the proceedings whether it appears that the acts and omissions complained of by the applicant are capable of falling within the scope of that convention, ratio materiae. The Court recalls that for purposes of deciding whether a dispute existed between the parties at the time of the filing of the application, it takes into account in particular any statements or documents exchanged between the parties, as well as any exchanges made in multilateral settings. In so doing, it pays special attention to the author of the statement or document, its intended or actual addressee, and its content. The existence of a dispute is a matter for objective determination by the court. It is a matter of substance, not a question of form or procedure. The court notes that South Africa issued public statements in various multilateral and bilateral settings in which it expressed its view that, in light of the nature, scope, and extent of Israel's military operations in Gaza, Israel's actions amounted to violations of its obligations under the Genocide Convention. For instance, at the resumed 10th Emergency Special Session of the United Nations General Assembly on 12 December 2023, at which Israel was represented, the South African representative to the United Nations stated that, I quote, "The events of the past 6 weeks in Gaza have illustrated that Israel is acting contrary to its obligations in terms of the Genocide Convention." End of quote. South Africa recalled this statement in its note verbal of 21 December 2023 to the Embassy of Israel in Pretoria. The court notes that Israel dismissed any accusation of genocide in the context of the conflict in Gaza in a document published by the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs on 6 December 2023, which was subsequently updated and reproduced on the website of the Israel Defense Forces on 15 December 2023 under the title, "The War Against Hamas, Answering Your Most Pressing Questions," stating that, I quote, "The accusation of genocide against Israel is not only wholly unfounded as a matter of fact and law, it is morally repugnant." End of quote. In the document, Israel also stated that, I quote, "The accusation of genocide is not just legally and factually incoherent, it is obscene, and that there was no valid basis in fact or law for the outrageous charge of genocide." End of quote. In light of the foregoing, the court considers that the parties appear to hold clearly opposite views as to whether certain acts or omissions allegedly committed by Israel in Gaza amount to violations by the latter of its obligations under the Genocide Convention. The court finds that the aforementioned elements are sufficient at this stage to establish prima facie the existence of a dispute between the parties relating to the interpretation, application, or fulfillment of the Genocide Convention. As to whether the acts and omissions complained of by the applicant appear to be capable of falling within the provisions of the Genocide Convention, the court recalls that South Africa considers Israel to be responsible for committing genocide in Gaza and for failing to prevent and punish genocidal acts. South Africa contends that Israel has also violated other obligations under the Genocide Convention, including those concerning conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to genocide, attempted genocide, and complicity in genocide. At the present stage of the proceedings, the court is not required to ascertain whether any violations of Israel's obligations under the Genocide Convention have occurred. Such a finding could only be made by the court at the stage of the examination of the merits of the present case. At the stage of making an order on the request for an indication of provisional measures, the court's task is to establish whether the acts and omissions complained of by the applicant appear to be capable of falling within the provisions of the Genocide Convention. In the court's view, at least some of the acts and omissions alleged by South Africa to have been committed by Israel in Gaza appear to be capable of falling within the provisions of the Convention. In light of the following, the court concludes that, prima facie, it has jurisdiction pursuant to Article 9 of the Convention to entertain the case. Given this conclusion, the court considers that it cannot accede to Israel's request that the case be removed from the general list. The court turns next to the question of standing of South Africa. The court notes that the respondent did not challenge the standing of the applicant in the present proceedings.